All right, well, let's pour some salt on some people, especially someone who's been getting under my skin a lot lately, which is Rahm Emanuel. So I'll set the story up, and we can pour our salt together, Nando.
Sure.
So the Biden campaign has very clearly and explicitly rejected progressivism in its campaign in an effort to appeal to these never Trump Republicans. This has been an ongoing discussion that we've had on this show. And I think it's really important to not just consider the consequences of that when it comes to this particular election, but think about how this really does move the Democratic Party further to the right, as if that's what this country needed. And so the Democratic Party platform, made it clear that they rejected progressive policy proposals, even though it would just be a symbolic gesture to say that they support things like the Green New Deal or Medicare for All. But they went even further when it came to the speaker lineup at the DNC. You had Colin Powell and a bunch of other Bush-era Republicans speaking to a party that has voters that are honestly, based on polling, moving further to the left. And if you're worried about the outcome of the general election, you should be, because it looks like the Biden camp is taking advice from morons and failed politicians like Rahm Emanuel, who gave this unbelievable interview to CNBC just recently. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
Also, that 1980 was the touchstone for an election. That was the year of the Reagan Democrat. This will be the year of the Biden Republicans. You can see the Biden campaign with John Kasich, Cindy McCain, Colin Powell et al. Made a direct appeal to them. This is an election, in my view, that's kind of got two things. Donald Trump's got depth. He has his 41%. He drills down hard on them. He hasn't grown it all, but he's trying to energize that base and keep it really mobilized. Joe Biden's got breadth. He's got 4-star generals on one end and Black Lives protesters on the other end. That is a very broad coalition. And if with a concentration, not only through the election, but governing, you can take Biden Republicans who do not like the anti-science, do not like the anti-diversity, the hostility to other that comes out of the Republican Party, culturally move them into a comfort zone where they're more self-identified with the Democratic Party than the Republican Party. That's what the Reagan Democrats did starting in 80, and it evolved over time. But you have to have not only an electoral strategy, but as well as a governing strategy to see that as an opportunity. And my view is you don't want this to be a transactional election. You want this to be the opportunity of a transformational election.
No, that's not what you want. And I think recent election polling bears that out. Nando, we have one other video from this interview, but before we get to it, I wanted to get your thoughts so far.
So it's important to understand Rahm Emanuel was the quote-unquote architect of the Democratic takeover of the House and Senate in 2006. And that's basically what his reputation was built on as a politician, really. And it's important to understand that the Democrats won on that election because it was an absolute wave election. It was in 2006. People had really turned on the war in Iraq. The Bush administration's response to Hurricane Katrina was an absolute joke. So Bush was like historically unpopular, and like basically it was inevitable that a Democratic wave would happen. It looks like, and Ryan Grimm and others have done reporting on this, that Democrats actually underperformed even in that wave election because of the strategy of Rahm Emanuel to basically run Republicans light. Like, I mean, in that election, he bet on, these like former, like generals and stuff and small business owners and people who were just very conservative to run as Democrats. And it looks like they actually probably underperformed the polling and what they should have won by an even bigger margin. And he's clung to that strategy and that reputation. He's been very effective at using the media to harness that reputation. And he is really one of the architects of trying to basically transform the Democratic Party into more of a Republican Party, like just essentially just to turn them into Republicans and make them, indistinguishable. So yeah, Rahm Emanuel sucks.
Yeah,
and
he definitely does.
Too.
But also, I mean, like, he has this assumption that even if you move further to the right, the progressive wing of the party isn't going to be turned off by it. I mean, he's talking about this broad coalition. And he was definitely providing kudos to the Biden campaign for rejecting two major progressive policy proposals. And he talks about that a little bit in the second part of the interview. Let's watch that.
Is no new Green Deal. There's no Medicare for all. Probably the single two topics that were discussed the most. That's not even in the platform. Joe Biden has been very specific about the direction he wants to take. And if, from a political strategy, developing a policy both that solves the problems, number one, but then builds the cohesion of that coalition. I would have progressive ends with moderate means. And I think that's a way you make sure that you keep this coalition from ever tipping too far either way. And to date, let me just take the measure. He's done a very good job of keeping the progressive wing and a more moderate wing in the same tent without becoming an easy target for Donald Trump and the Republicans. Remember, part of the Republicans was not only appeal to soft Republicans or anti-Trump Republicans, it was also to give Joe Biden what I call his inoculation shots, because and I know next week the Trump campaign is going to put out this secret photo of Joe Biden in his camouflage outfit with Fidel Castro and Che Guevara and say he's this big lefty. And so this, John Kasich and Colin Powell don't exactly endorse and support big P progressive policies.
69% of Americans, that includes Republican voters, by the way, nationally representative sample, 69% of Americans in a poll for The Hill said that they want a single-payer healthcare model in this country. 69%. That's a huge portion of Americans. And while Rahm Emanuel is yapping about how important it is to appeal to like the John Kasichs of the world who couldn't even win a Republican primary, let's look at what the impact of Biden moving further to the right has been on his campaign, because he was doing really well not too long ago. He was leading Trump in the double digits in a lot of these incredibly important critical swing states. And now Trump is closing in on him. So just take a look at that. Wisconsin, Biden's not leading by much, 3.5%. North Carolina, Trump is actually leading by a small margin. Florida, Biden is leading by 3.7%. Pennsylvania, margin's a little bigger, but not enough for me to be comfortable. 4.7%. Michigan, 2.6%. Arizona, 2.2%. So look, those numbers are within the margin of error. And if you look at the trend, you can see how Trump's numbers are going up, Biden's numbers are going down. And it's certainly more pronounced as Biden was more vocal and his campaign was more vocal in moving further to the right. Why would they vote for Republican light when they can vote for the real deal? And the never Trump Republicans, unfortunately, are not a giant group of people in this country right now. They account for about, based on some estimates that I read about 10% of the Republican Party. Right? And so they're disgusted by Trump, but these are literally Bush-era Republicans who Obama campaigned against with this message of hope and change. And now his VP is like, no. Not only did we not give you guys hope and change, we're going to go ahead and bring those Republicans into our coalition, not just as a transactional thing, but as a transformational thing. And that is disgusting and terrifying.
History shows that centrism is a political loser. The center is a small portion of the American electorate. Just look at, Democrats always running these lame centrists just keep on getting clobbered by insane right-wing Republicans, right? Al Gore in 2000, John Kerry in 2004. Before that, all the Democratic candidates that Reagan clobbered, Dukakis, Walter Mondale, all these people, they just get clobbered by right-wing Republicans. The one who won big was Barack Obama, who we know in hindsight is like a neoliberal centrist, but he read left at the time. He was considered the risky alternative at the time. Hillary Clinton was considered the safe kind of centrist bet. Instead, the Democratic Party elected Obama, who, read as like a more radical person to the vast majority of people. And he won big, mostly by energizing his base. Right? Bill Clinton in 92, 96, he won in 92 as a freak election in which the H.W. Bush's support was eaten away at by Ross Perot. So it's Bill Clinton did not get a huge chunk of the electorate. He won with like 42% of the vote. So it just history shows that these centrist, like moving to the center in the general election is a political disaster. And in terms of governing, this idea that you can do the sort of progressive ends with moderate means or whatever is insane, because the only thing that matters in it when you're evaluating a politician is something I say all the time. It's not so much what is in that person's heart, it is to whom they owe power, right?
Bingo.
Which is why it's so important to look at the coalitions that elect certain politicians, because they will govern to service the wants and desires of that coalition. And the Democratic Party, if they actively cater and win by courting Republicans, like say Joe Biden does eke it out with this kind of suburban strategy, which is entirely possible, he will govern to service that electorate, the one who got him in and the one who they've catered to, right? It's to whom do you owe power, which is why when you looked at, the Bernie Sanders coalition, and it was so important to look at the class composition of that, and the racial composition of that and all that stuff, because that is who ultimately, even though we trust Bernie intrinsically, we like him, we think that he is honest. Like at the end of the day, Bernie is a politician and will govern to service the people who got him into power. So this is why this strategy that is being pushed by Rahm Emanuel, and really Rahm Emanuel is the architect of it in the last several decades, because he was in the Clinton administration as well. It's been so disastrous, not just for the country on the whole, because he's pushed awful policies from NAFTA to border militarization to a million other things, but it is a political disaster for the Democratic Party. Even from their own interests of holding power, they just keep losing to these insane right-wing Republicans, and it makes sense. I mean, that's what it is. They turn out their base and we don't.
Yeah, look, you're so right about that. And we've seen how the impact of this played out in real time when comparing the RNC to the DNC. I think that there was a very real effort for the Democratic Party to shy away from anything that even resembles a populist message, a message that actually considers the wants and desires of their own electorate. They focused on Biden's empathy, which is great, but how is empathy going to help pay people's medical bills or put food on the table for them or give them jobs, for instance? Whereas with the RNC, it was a completely different message. They attacked Biden. They still attacked Biden as some sort of socialist, some sort of radical. And at the same time, Trump did latch on to a message of, lessening the economic instability of Americans. He bragged about lowering drug prices, even though he hasn't, right? But it doesn't matter. So much of politics is based on the messaging. You can just lie straight to your constituents, straight to voters. You can put out all sorts of deceptive ads, and there's a portion of the electorate that's going to believe it, right? They're going to think, oh yeah, that's the guy for me. He's tough. He's fighting back against the pharmaceutical companies. And we didn't get much of that messaging from the DNC. And so I think that has already taken a toll on the polling. And we'll see how it plays out. But for all the people who are so incredibly confident about how the general election is going to turn out, I think you should read the red flags. I see them and I'm concerned about them. Yeah.
And, the polls are tightening. Partisans will ultimately kind of fall into line. That was just, it always kind of happens as the election gets closer, the polls tighten. And yeah, I remember the first election that I really covered as a member of the news media was the 2012 presidential election, which people don't really remember that much because it was this kind of sort of boring election between Obama and Romney. But I was working at Univision at the time. And you look at Obama's campaign, and Obama was in trouble in that election. Like Obama was, the 2010 midterms were absolutely disastrous for the Democrats. And Obama, his instincts told him to run to the left on a populist message in that election and paint Mitt Romney as this brazen plutocrat, which he was, obviously, but to really tie him to specifically his op-ed in the New York Times to let Detroit fail. And Obama ran on his bailout of the auto manufacturers and specifically into saving those jobs. Mitt Romney's father was the chairman of GM. So that was really remarkable, is that he then wrote the op-ed in New York. So that was Obama's strategy in that election, and he won pretty comfortably, even though he was in trouble at the beginning. So
yeah, I remember when he started campaigning in 2012. I was at TYT at the time because I've been at TYT forever, And I remember both Cenk and I were like, whoa, look at campaign Obama. Very different from President Obama. And you're absolutely right. He just immediately pivoted back to this message of economic equality, which, he completely abandoned as soon as he was elected in 2008.
He said inequality is the defining issue of our time.
It's amazing. It is
amazing.
Amazing.
Like a Democratic candidate saying that today, like a mainstream one, it's crazy. But I remember Obama said that.
Yeah.